And then gender, I've always understood, has been a variety of manifestations of those male and female throughout history and culture, and indeed in our own time. There are so many different ways of being male, and there are many different ways of being female. And in some respect, I think that if you really would press it in everyone's expression of their sex, it's almost as if everyone has their own gender, because we're so complicated, so overlapping in so many ways. How is that? Because also seems to me that distinction has shifted in the last 10 years or so. That the clear distinction between someone's sex and someone's gender is now being challenged, and the trans question has inevitably entered that discussion area as well. So tell me what you understand by sex and what you understand by gender.
Well, first of all, I work, most of my work is in the policy sphere. And in the policy sphere, we don't differentiate between sex and gender. There are already existing sex discrimination laws. So, for instance, Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which says you can't discriminate in employment based on sex, which, by the way, was put in the Civil Rights Act as a poison pill by a segregationist. But if I get fired from my job, it would be very weird since I work for a trans organization. But if I got fired for being trans from a job, it would be because of my sex in the legal sense, in the 1964 Civil Rights Act sense, right? It's because my employer thinks I'm a man or thinks I'm a woman or doesn't think I'm the right kind of man or thinks I'm too much of a man or too much of a woman or whatever it is they think. It's about man and woman. And that's what was meant by sex in the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And frankly, that's what was meant by sex in Title IX and the Fair Housing Act and the Affordable Care Act, et cetera. So sex, in a policy sense, encompasses sexual orientation and gender identity. Now, legally, the Supreme Court said that in the Bostock decision, which I think we'll talk about in a little bit.
Yes.
But
I remember just a brief for I remember back in the marriage equality movement when we got to Hawaii back in 1993. Unbelievable, but there was a decision there. The state court argued that their own constitution's prohibition of sex prejudice, sex discrimination, applied to a gay couple because one of them was the wrong sex. And now it's a very simple and clear decision, but I happen to be very uncomfortable with it. The reason is I really think that gay people should be protected as gay people, not as simply reflecting the society's view of them as in some way behaving the wrong way for their sex. Okay. And I think you and I would agree that back in 1964, there wasn't a majority in the Congress to make sure transgender people were being protected from discrimination, right? As you say,
they never thought of it.
Right. No.
But what they thought of was they didn't want to have people be fired because they were men or they were women.
Right.
That's what they were thinking.
Right.
But if I am fired, it is, even in their construct, because I'm either man or woman, and I'm pretending to be the other, or I'm acting as the other, I'm dressing as the other, whatever it is they're thinking, it is about man and woman. And that's the same thing with the Hawaii marriage thing. I agree completely that we need sexual orientation-specific laws, gender identity-specific laws. But it's also true that if you're being denied marriage equality, now we don't need that because of more recent decisions, but it is because they think you're doing something that a man shouldn't do.
Yes.
And that's about you being a man, therefore it's sex discrimination.
Yes.
So in policy, we don't differentiate, except in some circumstances, between sex and gender. And that's, I think, frustrating for people who are, will be nice and say philosophically bent, or not bent.
Can't use the word bent.
Not
but
bent.
It's fine.
I meant not bent. I didn't mean that. I really didn't. Or tilted. Tilted towards a philosophical approach.